that pelvis to develop well is influenced by the nutritional state of that young woman at that time. And you can describe different types of pelvis, and a particular pelvis that is high risk is a woman who has a flat pelvis. And so a flat pelvis is characterized by a reduced external conjugate diameter. And that is an indication, a marker of poor bony growth in childhood and adolescence, which is reflective of poor social conditions and particularly worse nutrition. Now, importantly, the offspring of women with flat pelvises have increased risk. They have increased risk of hypertension and stroke. They have impaired vascular development, narrower carotid arteries, higher blood pressure, and stiffer, less compliant arteries. So what happens to young girls as they are becoming women has great importance for the opportunity of their children in terms of their lifetime risk of ill health. There are similar examples that one can characterize for certain cancers, and therefore by adequately capturing and understanding the nature of growth, the nature of the tissues that are being deposited, the nutrient reserves that they represent, the opportunity for buffered nutrients that they offer for a pregnancy, and the ability of the fetus to grow appropriately are important considerations going forward. The bottom line is that life is a cumulative experience. I guess nobody needed to tell you that, but the most obvious things sometimes have to be stated explicitly. And what we are now is an accumulation of our past experiences in many regards. And so we start with the gene, both in mother and father, which they took from their own parents, so we're looking at least at grandparents, enabling an opportunity for an embryo during preconceptional experiences, how that embryo grows during pregnancy into an infant, a child, an adolescent, and up to adulthood. And at each stage, there are ways of capturing or measuring what has been happening in terms of the nutritional environment, either through programming, capturing genetic changes and epigenetic changes, growth and size, the shape and size that enables, the body composition at all ages, and the lifestyle that people choose to engage in against that background. And those are the things that determine health and well-being or disease. And so the key features of the epidemiological studies which David has led and developed with colleagues, many of whom are in this room and will tell their own story during this meeting, is first of all that there are graded inverse associations between markers of fetal growth and specific adult degenerative conditions, most notably cardiovascular disease. And it's important to put in parentheses that the relationship with cancer goes in the opposite direction. So it isn't inverse, it's direct, the association between markers of fetal growth and cancer. And that is going to be a big challenge going forward. Secondly is that these are seen for both sexes, although they may be different in their detail between genders, and they've been reproduced in a variety of studies in other populations. So this is a feature of humankind, not simply a strange English people. The similar patterns of the outcomes in terms of death or disease also associates with the intermediary markers. So in shorter term studies, it is possible to explore risk factors in relationship to those intermediary markers. And importantly, we're not talking about prematurity here. The effects of smaller size at birth cannot be explained or are not simply a consequence of prematurity. There are additional risks associated with prematurity that should be seen as a separate condition. This is across the normal range of birth weight seen in normal populations across the world. And equally, although again they interact with broad social factors and social adverse consequences are likely to be more exaggerated in these vulnerable populations, they are not explained away by social factors or confounding influences acting in adult life. And so I think that certainly as a nutritionist, what David Barker has provided us with is a big challenge, the biggest challenge we have ever had, and he has offered us the opportunity to explain some fundamental biological processes which impact directly upon the well-being of human populations. He isn't a nutritionist, and he hasn't always understood the niceties of nutrition, but what he has done is describe from an epidemiological basis relationships that have to be bedded in nutrition, which relate very closely and directly to disease. And I'm only sorry that he wasn't here to tell you the story himself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Alan Jackson, for this outstanding conference, telling us about how genes, maternal size, maternal nutrition, maternal environment can affect the birth weight and the baby size, and can also alter health during the life cycle of the individuals. We have 15 minutes for discussion, so we'll take this opportunity. If you have any question related to this issue. Yes. Microphone, please.
Dr. Jackson, you did a wonderful job of presenting someone else's work, and I would like to ask you, what about your own work in relation to this? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Thank you. I'll probably tell you rather more about it tomorrow, because clearly what I am interested in is the interplay of nutrients at different stages of development in enabling development, and the specific factors that are important for different tissues and organs. So in the early days, we were particularly interested in knowing that nutrient exposure could account for these relationships, and that was a question that David brought to us and asked whether or not it was possible in nutritional terms to explain this, and we went through a process where we worked Occam's razor and said, if we were to explain all of these factors, then this is how they must work. We don't know whether they do work like that, but that is how they might work. And on that basis, we then developed some animal studies where the particular interest that we had, there are lots of animal studies that look at the extremes of dietary intake, very low intakes or very high intakes. That wasn't our concern. Our concern was, if we look at variation in nutrient intake across the normal range, as we would expect for the population, can you get physiological and pathological changes in the offspring? And we were able to demonstrate that that was so in terms of developmental considerations, the acquisition of changes in blood pressure, immune inflammatory responses, and other aspects of growth. And we then said, well, can we trace that back to genetic considerations? And we were able to trace it back to defined epigenetic considerations, so that we could argue that from the molecule through the developmental physiology into functionality, we could reproduce those changes. Next question is then, if you take those experiences from animal studies and apply them to humans, can you get that? And we were fortunate enough to have collaborative studies with colleagues in India and elsewhere, where we've been able to engage in a series of studies to ask those questions. The most exciting studies we have at the moment are two, one with colleagues in India, where we're doing a randomized controlled trial of enriched food intakes before and during pregnancy to see whether that has the impact that we would like, and we're expecting the results of that to start flowing next year and the year after. Out of that, we've already had some very strong signals about the importance of vitamin B12. And the other side is that on the basis of that, we've been able to set up a similar study in Southampton, the Southampton Women's Survey, where we have taken a population of women, many thousands of women, and characterized them before pregnancy, followed them through pregnancy, and now we're following the children who are up to 8 years of age to see what their subsequent growth, development, and functionality will look like.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lehlou, vous pouvez parler en français, il y a une traduction. On va lui donner une traduction.
Merci, je suis plus à l'aise pour parler en français, je m'en excuse. Je vous remercie aussi pour cet exposé très 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 intéressant. Ma question, en fait, j'ai deux petites questions. D'abord, j'aimerais savoir si les gynécologues sont sensibilisés par rapport à ce que vous venez de dire. Est-ce qu'il y a dans les congrès ou sinon dans les universités de plus en plus, est-ce qu'on en parle par rapport à ça? Parce que j'estime que c'est quelque chose de très important, d'une part. D'autre part, l'autre petite question, c'est qu'il y a beaucoup de femmes qui font par les changements hormonaux, qui font énormément de vomissements et qui ont du mal pendant les 3 premiers mois à manger et à avoir tout simplement une quantité de nutriments correcte pour elles-mêmes et même pour le fœtus. Qu'est-ce qu'il en est? Comment est-ce qu'il y a eu un travail, si ce n'est que pour ces 3 premiers mois? Voilà, je vous remercie.